Assalamu alaikum. In this video, we're gonna discuss the Kubernetes architecture and we're gonna see the different components inside the Kubernetes cluster. So a Kubernetes cluster is simply a set of nodes. So you have some nodes and they can be either virtual or physical. Always we have one of these nodes is called master node. So for example, let's say here that this node is the master node and the other nodes are worker nodes. Okay, so here for example worker nodes number 1, here worker node number 2, and here the worker node number 3. Okay, the master node is the core components inside the Kubernetes cluster, and he manages the whole cluster and he is responsible for anything that happens inside the Kubernetes cluster. Okay, so the master node is the brain of the cluster, and anything that happens or that we apply inside the cluster, always it goes through the master node. Okay, now let's start discussing the components of the master node. The master node, first of all, we have something that's called an API server. So let's put it here, for example, API server. And the API server is responsible for all the communication that happens inside the Kubernetes cluster. So for example, the communication with the worker nodes is done through the API server, and if we want to deploy any Kubernetes object inside the cluster, we write the manifest file here in YAML, and then we deploy them using the kubectl command to the API server, and the API server will deploy those objects on the worker nodes depending on the constraint that we mentioned in the manifest file. Okay, the second component that we're going to discuss is the control manager. So here also we have a component that's called a control manager, and the control manager is responsible for taking care of the work nodes and of the containers and the pods running on those nodes. Okay, the third one is the scheduler. So we have the scheduler. So the responsibility of the scheduler is to select the adequate work nodes to schedule and to deploy the Kubernetes object like pods. Okay, finally here in the work node we have also a database that's called an etcd database. So it is called etcd. Okay, and in the etcd we have all the information and everything, any data related to the Kubernetes cluster about the work nodes or about the pods or about anything is stored in this database. Okay, so let's move to the work nodes. The responsibility of the work nodes is to host our application in form of containers. That's why we need on all of these work nodes a container engine to run our container. So let's put here container engine, and same here and also here. So we need this container engine because we're gonna run our application in form of containers on these work nodes. So let's say that here we have some container. They can be any type of container like Docker. Okay, and to deploy this container, the work node will receive orders from the master node, and here we have something that's called a kubelet. So kubelet that will receive the orders from the master node and will apply them here inside the worker nodes. Okay, so the responsibility of the kubelet is to receive orders from the master node and apply them in these worker nodes. Okay, so for example, if we want to deploy some new pods here inside our cluster, the kubelet will receive some orders from the master node, and based on that orders, it will, for example, deploy some new pods. Okay. And the last component of the work nodes that we have is the Kube-proxy. So I will put it here on this work node. And the Kube-proxy is responsible for any networking process in the Kubernetes cluster. So it enables communication between the worker nodes and between the containers that are deployed on this worker node. Okay, and also it exposes our application to the outside world, so the users can access our application. So that's an overview about the Kubernetes architecture, and thank you.